homeless black woman approached by police on a cold, rainy night, her quiet presence on the sidewalk quickly turning into a scene of unwarranted suspicion. She sat on the ground, her meager belongings tucked into a worn bag, holding a small sign that read, "Homeless, hungry, anything helps." The world rushed past her without a second glance, the bright lights of the bustling city reflecting in the rain pooling at her feet. Two police officers approached with deliberate steps, their voices cutting through the dull hum of the street. "Hey, you can't sit here," the lead officer said sharply, his tone commanding. "This is public property, not a place for loitering." The woman lifted her gaze, calm but weary. "I'm not hurting anyone," she replied softly, clutching her bag a little tighter. "I'll move soon." "Soon isn't good enough," the officer snapped, leaning closer. "Got ID? Or are you running from something?" The second officer's eyes lingered on her bag, his smirk betraying his thoughts. "What's in there? You stealing from folks now? Let's see what you're hiding." The woman didn't respond, her grip firm on the strap of her bag. Her silence seemed to provoke the lead officer, who took another step forward. "Don't make this harder than it has to be. We'll take you in for loitering if you don't cooperate." Before anything further could happen, the distant growl of engines broke through the tension. Black SUVs with tinted windows pulled up smoothly to the curb, their sleek presence a sharp contrast to the gritty surroundings. Doors opened, and several FBI agents stepped out, their movements precise and authoritative. The lead agent approached without hesitation, his sharp gaze sweeping over the officers. "Stand down," he ordered, his voice firm. The officers exchanged baffled looks, confusion spreading across their faces. The woman sat silently, her calm demeanor unchanged, even as the FBI's arrival left everyone on the street stunned. The sound of rain tapping against the sidewalk filled the silence, as the woman sat unmoving, the shock of the FBI's sudden arrival still lingering in the air. Her calm demeanor hadn't wavered, but beneath it was a lifetime of resilience. Her mind raced back to how it had all started, how someone like her, once successful and respected, had ended up here. The woman hadn't always been homeless. She had been a highly skilled government contractor, working on classified projects that required both intelligence and precision. She had a sharp mind, a gift for problem-solving, and a reputation for reliability, but all of that had been ripped away when she was wrongfully accused of leaking sensitive information, a crime she hadn't committed. A betrayal by a trusted colleague had destroyed her reputation, costing her both her career and her financial stability. With no support system and a cloud of suspicion following her, she had been left with nothing but her determination to survive. Now, she lived in the shadows of the bustling city. Towering skyscrapers and glittering lights stood as constant reminders of what she had lost. The contrast between wealth and poverty was stark. Business people rushed past her daily, their tailored suits brushing by her frayed jacket as if she didn't exist. She spent her nights on the cold, hard pavement, her few belongings packed into a tattered bag. The officers who approached her represented two sides of the same coin. The lead officer, brash and aggressive, carried an air of superiority, his every word dripping with disdain. He was quick to judge, using his authority as a weapon. His partner, though less overtly hostile, was no better. He followed orders without question, his silence complicit in every injustice. Together, they embodied a system that too often preyed on the vulnerable instead of protecting them. "You've been out here too long," the lead officer had said, his tone sharp and commanding. "What's your name?" The woman didn't flinch, her voice calm and measured. "I haven't done anything wrong." "Wrong?" the officer barked, his voice rising. "You're loitering. That's enough for me. Show me some ID." The second officer stayed back, glancing uneasily at the woman's small sign. He didn't seem comfortable with the lead officer's tone, but made no move to intervene. "Just do what he says," he muttered, his voice low. The woman's quiet resilience stood in stark contrast to their hostility. She didn't raise her voice or lash out, though she had every reason to. She simply sat there, her hands gripping the strap of her bag tightly. Everything she owned was in that bag, including fragments of a life she had once cherished. The city around them was alive with activity, yet this small interaction felt isolated, as though the rest of the world had faded into the background. Nearby, pedestrians slowed their pace, some casting pitying glances, others looking away entirely. The neon lights of nearby storefronts reflected in the rain-slicked pavement, a garish backdrop to the tension unfolding in front of them. The officers, intent on asserting their authority, pressed her further. "What's in the bag?" the lead officer demanded. "You hiding something? Stolen property, maybe?" The woman didn't answer. She had learned long ago that silence could be more powerful than words, but inside her frustration simmered. These men didn't know her story, and they didn't care to. To them, she was just another face in the crowd, someone to be controlled and dismissed. And then, the black SUVs had arrived, their sudden presence cutting through the scene like a knife. The officers, so sure of their power moments ago, were now silenced by the commanding authority of the FBI agents who stepped out. The woman stayed still, watching as the tables turned in an instant. She had faced so much to get to this moment. Now, as the rain fell around her, she felt a glimmer of hope that perhaps the truth would finally be revealed. The sudden arrival of the FBI agents had left the officers momentarily frozen, their authority shaken. The woman sat silently, her calm demeanor unbroken as she glanced at the agents stepping out of the sleek black SUVs. She could feel the attention shifting, the oppressive weight of the police interrogation momentarily lifting. But the lead officer wasn't ready to relinquish control so easily. His voice cut through the tension as he turned back toward her. "Don't think this changes anything," he spat. "You're not getting off that easily." The second officer shifted uneasily, his confidence visibly shaken by the agent's presence, yet he stayed silent, unwilling to contradict his partner. The lead officer crouched slightly, bringing himself closer to her eye level. "Let's start over," he said, his voice dripping with forced calm. "What's your name? Where are you from? And what exactly are you doing here with this bag?" The woman looked at him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "I've already told you. I haven't done anything wrong," she replied evenly. "Wrong?" he barked, his voice rising again. "Loitering is wrong. Refusing to answer questions is wrong. And from the looks of it, you're carrying something you shouldn't be." The woman said nothing, her hands resting protectively on her bag. The silence seemed to fuel his anger. He straightened up, towering over her. "Look, we can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. Empty the bag, or I'll do it for you." The second officer, still lingering behind, glanced nervously at the approaching FBI agents, but made no move to stop his partner. "She could have been stealing, Daniels," he muttered under his breath. "Maybe we should check." The woman's grip tightened on the strap of her bag. She knew the truth wouldn't matter to them, no matter how she explained herself. It hadn't mattered before, and it wouldn't now. Her thoughts drifted back to a time when she wasn't sitting on the sidewalk, accused of crimes she didn't commit. She had been in a bright office, surrounded by colleagues who once respected her. Her work as a government contractor had been fulfilling and challenging, involving sensitive projects that required both skill and discretion. She had taken pride in her role, knowing the importance of what she was doing. But one betrayal had taken it all away. A trusted colleague, someone she had worked closely with for years, had used her access to leak classified information. When the breach was discovered, she had been the one blamed. The colleague had covered their tracks well, leaving her as the scapegoat. Accusations flew fast and her reputation crumbled. No one believed her innocence, and the people she had once called friends turned their backs on her. The fallout had been swift and merciless. She lost her job, her savings drained as she fought a legal battle she couldn't win. Before long, she lost her home too. The city that had once been a place of opportunity now felt like a prison, its towering buildings casting long shadows over her struggle to survive. "You hear me?" The lead officer's sharp voice pulled her back to the present. He was pointing a finger at her now, his patience worn thin. "Get up. You're under arrest for loitering and resisting." The second officer hesitated. "Are we really doing this, Daniels? I mean, with the feds here." Daniels shot him a glare. "I don't care who's here. This is our jurisdiction, and she's breaking the law." The woman stayed seated, her calm composure intact, even as her heart raced. She could see the crowd that had begun to gather, their murmurs growing louder. Some held up phones recording the interaction. She took a deep breath and spoke clearly. "You're making a mistake," she said. "I've done nothing wrong." Daniels leaned closer, his voice lowering into a growl. "We'll decide what's wrong, and you'll do what I say." The crowd shifted uneasily, and one person spoke up. "Leave her alone. She hasn't done anything." Daniels turned sharply, his glare silencing the voice. "Stay out of it," he barked. But the growing tension was palpable, and even the second officer looked increasingly uncomfortable. The woman remained calm, but her grip on the bag didn't loosen. "This bag doesn't belong to you," she said, "and neither does my freedom." Daniels reached down, grabbing at the strap of the bag. The woman instinctively pulled back, her strength surprising him. He stumbled slightly, his frustration boiling over. "That's it," he shouted, reaching for his cuffs. Before he could act, a commanding voice rang out from behind him. "That's enough." Daniels froze, turning to see the lead FBI agent standing just a few feet away. The agent's presence was imposing, his expression unreadable. Behind him, several other agents stood at attention, their presence a clear reminder of who was truly in charge. The woman looked up at the agent, her expression still calm, but her eyes betraying a flicker of relief. Daniels opened his mouth to protest, but the agent raised a hand, silencing him. "We're taking it from here," the agent said firmly. "Step back." Daniels hesitated, his jaw tightening as he struggled to assert control. But the agent's authority was absolute, and he had no choice but to comply. He stepped back reluctantly, his frustration evident. The second officer glanced nervously between Daniels and the agents before finally stepping aside. The tension in the air began to ease, but the crowd remained, their eyes glued to the unfolding scene. The woman, still seated, looked up at the agent. He gave her a small nod, his demeanor professional yet kind. "We need to talk," he said simply. As she stood slowly, her grip on the bag unwavering, the agent gestured for her to follow. The officers watched in silence as she walked toward the SUVs, the weight of the situation finally dawning on them. The crowd began to disperse, but the murmurs of discontent lingered. For the woman, this was just another chapter in a long fight for truth and justice. And for the officers, it was a harsh reminder that not everything, or everyone, was as it seemed. The tension in the air was suffocating. The woman stood now, her bag slung tightly over her shoulder, as the lead officer circled her like a predator. His frustration was palpable, his every movement sharper and more aggressive. The second officer lingered nearby, his unease growing, but his silence unbroken. "You think you can just walk away?" the lead officer spat, his voice dripping with anger. "You're not going anywhere until we get some answers." The woman stood firm, her calm demeanor unwavering despite the hostility surrounding her. "I don't owe you anything," she replied evenly. "You have no reason to hold me." The officer laughed, but there was no humor in it. "No reason? Let's see. You're loitering, resisting, and refusing to comply. That's enough for me." The second officer shifted, his eyes darting nervously between his partner and the gathering crowd. More phones were raised now, the murmurs growing louder. "Maybe we should just wait for backup," he suggested quietly. "This is getting out of hand." "Backup?" the lead officer snapped, turning on him. "We don't need backup for this. We're handling it." The woman's voice cut through the rising tension. "You're escalating a situation that doesn't need to happen. Let me go." But the officer's pride had taken over. "Not a chance. Empty the bag, or I'll do it for you." As he stepped closer, reaching for her bag, the unmistakable sound of screeching tires echoed down the street. The crowd turned in unison, their murmurs falling into silence as several black SUVs sped toward the scene, their sleek forms glinting under the streetlights. The vehicles came to a sudden stop, their doors opening in near-perfect synchronization. Agents in dark suits stepped out, their presence commanding and immediate. The lead agent, a tall man with a calm but authoritative demeanor, stepped forward, his eyes scanning the scene. "What's going on here?" the agent asked, his voice steady and firm. The lead officer faltered, his confidence visibly shaken. "This is our jurisdiction," he said quickly. "We've got it under control." The agent's expression didn't change. "Step back," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "We're taking it from here." The officer hesitated, his jaw tightening as he glanced at the crowd and then at his partner. "She's resisting," he said, though his voice lacked the conviction it held moments earlier. "We're just trying to figure out—" "You're done here," the agent interrupted. He turned to the woman, his sharp gaze softening slightly. "Ma'am, are you all right?" She nodded, her calm exterior intact even as a wave of relief swept through her. "I'm fine," she said simply. The crowd, now utterly captivated, began to whisper among themselves. The second officer stepped back, clearly relieved to relinquish control of the situation. The lead officer, however, wasn't ready to let go. "Who is she?" he demanded, his frustration boiling over. "What's this about?" The agent ignored him, motioning for his team to secure the area. One of the SUVs opened, revealing more agents inside. The lead agent turned back to the woman. "We've been looking for you," he said. "You're part of an ongoing investigation." The officer's face shifted from anger to confusion. "Investigation? What kind of—" "That's classified." The agent replied curtly. "Step aside." The woman looked at the agent, her grip on the bag finally relaxing. She knew this wasn't the end of her struggles, but for now, she was safe. The agents moved efficiently, their presence a stark contrast to the chaotic scene moments before. The lead officer, now visibly deflated, stepped back reluctantly. The crowd's whispers grew louder, their phones capturing every second. The agent turned to them, his voice cutting through the noise. "This is a federal matter. Please disperse." Slowly, the crowd began to scatter, though many lingered at a distance, their curiosity still piqued. The woman was escorted toward one of the SUVs, the tension in her shoulders easing with each step. The agent paused, glancing back at the officers. "Next time, think before you act," he said pointedly, his tone icy. "You might save yourself some embarrassment." The lead officer said nothing, his pride too wounded to respond. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, his guilt evident in his expression. As the woman climbed into the SUV, the door closed behind her with a sense of finality. The agents moved quickly, their vehicles pulling away as efficiently as they had arrived. The street, once buzzing with tension and hostility, was left in silence. For the woman, the moment was bittersweet. She was safe for now. But the memories of what she had endured, both in this encounter and in the months leading up to it, remained fresh. She looked out the window as the city lights blurred past, her mind already turning to what lay ahead. The officers remained on the sidewalk, their authority stripped away in an instant. The second officer finally spoke, his voice barely audible. What just happened? The lead officer didn't answer. He couldn't. The truth was too bitter to swallow. The sleek SUV hummed quietly as it pulled away from the tense scene, leaving the police officers behind. Inside, the woman sat in the back seat, clutching her bag tightly. The lead FBI agent sat across from her, his demeanor calm yet focused. "You've been hard to track down," he said, his tone even but laced with significance. "We've been looking for you for weeks." The woman met his gaze. "I had to stay hidden. There were too many risks if they found me before you did." The agent nodded knowingly. "We know what they did to you," he said, "and we're here to make it right." As the SUV navigated through the city streets, her mind drifted back to the moments that had brought her to this point. She remembered her days as a government contractor, a life filled with responsibility and precision. Her job had been to analyze financial systems for vulnerabilities, an expertise that often put her in proximity to sensitive information. She had been good at her work, too good. One day, she stumbled across something she wasn't supposed to see. The numbers didn't add up, and the inconsistencies pointed to something much bigger, a corruption ring involving high-ranking officials, including local government leaders and even members of law enforcement. Bribes, embezzlement, and illegal dealings were all buried within complex financial reports. She had uncovered the threads of a vast network of deceit. Initially, she tried to report what she found. But before she could take action, she was blindsided. A trusted colleague, someone she had worked closely with for years, betrayed her. They framed her for leaking classified information, turning her discovery against her. The same people she had planned to expose orchestrated her downfall, ensuring that her credibility was destroyed. The consequences had been swift and devastating. Her career was ruined, her reputation smeared, and her financial stability obliterated. She had fought back as much as she could, but the powerful figures behind the corruption had resources she couldn't match. When the legal battles drained her last savings, she was left with nothing. The woman had no choice but to disappear. She knew she was a target, and that staying visible could put her in even greater danger. With no home, no income, and no allies, she ended up on the streets. But she didn't stop fighting. While living in the shadows, she began gathering more evidence, piecing together the threads of the corruption she had uncovered. The agent's voice pulled her back to the present. "You were smart to lay low," he said. "The people involved would have done anything to keep you quiet." "They already did," she replied quietly. "They took everything from me." The agent leaned forward slightly, his tone firm. "But you survived, and you kept digging. That's what matters now." She nodded, her grip on the bag loosening slightly. "It wasn't just about surviving," she said. "I knew I had to finish what I started. Even if it meant living on the streets, I couldn't let them get away with it." The agent's expression softened. "You're not alone anymore. We have enough evidence to act, thanks to what you've gathered. The corruption ring you uncovered spans multiple cities and involves some very powerful people. But with your help, we can finally bring them down. The SUV slowed to a stop in front of a secure federal building. As the door opened, agents moved to escort her inside. The woman stepped out, her worn clothing and small bag a stark contrast to the sleek professionalism of her surroundings. Back at the scene they had left behind, the police officers were still reeling. The second officer stood silently, his unease clear as he processed the events. The lead officer, however, paced angrily, muttering under his breath, "What the hell just happened?" he finally said, his voice sharp. A bystander, still lingering with their phone, replied pointedly, "What happened? You messed with someone way out of your league." The officer glared at them, but said nothing. For the first time, his authority had been stripped away, leaving him scrambling to understand the bigger picture. Inside the federal building, the woman handed over the evidence she had worked so hard to protect. Flash drives, handwritten notes, and financial records were laid out in front of the agents, each piece a critical link in the chain. "This is everything I've got," she said. "It's enough to take them down, isn't it?" The lead agent nodded. "It's more than enough," he said. "You've done an incredible job. Now it's our turn to make sure justice is served." For the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. The weight she had carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a cautious sense of relief. She wasn't sure what her future held, but she knew one thing. The fight wasn't over, but she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Inside the secure federal building, the woman sat across from a team of agents, laying out the evidence she had protected at great personal cost. Flash drives, financial reports, and detailed notes were carefully reviewed, each piece confirming the corruption she had uncovered. The FBI wasted no time, initiating high-profile arrests within days. Politicians, government officials, and law enforcement officers implicated in the scandal were brought into custody, their faces plastered across news outlets. The corruption ring, which had operated with impunity for years, was finally exposed, and justice began to unfold. The fallout rippled through the city. The local police department, already under scrutiny for its treatment of vulnerable populations, found itself at the center of a public outcry. Video footage of the officers harassing the woman on the street went viral, sparking widespread condemnation. Investigations revealed that some members of the department had ties to the corruption ring, deepening the scandal. Community leaders called for reforms, and public pressure forced accountability measures that had long been avoided. For the woman, the days that followed were a mix of relief and uncertainty. The evidence she had provided vindicated her, proving the truth she had known all along. But rebuilding her life after such a long ordeal wasn't easy. She was no longer the person she had been before her betrayal. The years of homelessness, humiliation, and struggle had left scars, some visible, others not. Yet for the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility. The FBI offered her support, including assistance in clearing her name and connecting her with resources to help her start anew. Sitting in a small but warm apartment provided through a victim recovery program, she reflected on her journey. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, how systemic failures and prejudices had nearly destroyed her. The officers on that rainy night had seen only her circumstances, not the person she was or the truth she carried. Their actions, though painful, were a reminder of the broader challenges faced by so many like her, those pushed to the margins, overlooked, or dismissed. But as she looked at the growing pile of correspondence from people who had reached out after hearing her story, she realized the power of resilience and truth. Her determination to uncover corruption and fight for justice had not only dismantled a dangerous network, but also sparked conversations about systemic inequality, accountability, and empathy. Her story became a symbol of hope for those facing similar struggles. Though her scars remained, so did her strength. She began volunteering at organizations supporting homeless individuals, using her experiences to advocate for change. Her voice, once silenced, now carried the weight of her journey and the hope for a better future. As she sat by the window of her apartment, sunlight streaming in, she smiled faintly. The world wasn't perfect. It never had been. But she had proven that resilience and truth could prevail, even in the face of overwhelming odds. Seated in a quiet studio for her first interview since the investigation, the woman spoke with poise and determination. The room was a far cry from the rainy streets where she had fought to survive. But the lessons of those years remained with her. As cameras focused on her, she shared her story, weaving together the pain, resilience, and hope that had defined her journey. "We can't afford to look away," she said, her voice steady. "Every system, whether it's government, law enforcement, or our communities, needs accountability. Corruption thrives in silence, and so does prejudice. What I experienced was just one example of how people are dismissed or overlooked because of how they look or where they come from." She paused, her eyes meeting the camera as if addressing each viewer personally. "But it doesn't have to be this way. We all have a role to play in standing up for what's right. It starts with empathy, seeing the humanity in others, and continues with action, whether it's speaking out against injustice, supporting those who are marginalized, or holding systems accountable. Change is possible when we work together." The interviewer thanked her, commending her courage. As the interview wrapped up, the woman stood shaking hands with the crew before walking toward the exit. The camera followed her as she stepped into the sunlight outside. Her posture was upright, her steps steady, her head held high, a symbol of resilience and hope for those who saw her story. Her journey wasn't just about uncovering corruption or surviving injustice. It was a call to action for everyone watching. It was a reminder that resilience, truth, and collective effort could create a more just and compassionate world.